Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very exciting TF Together session with the expert guide, Alexandra Lawrence, who's been in Florence for over 20 years and in that time has founded Explore Florence as well as Forma Sideris, which you'll be telling us a little bit about later on. So just to explain what this virtual visit will consist of, Alexandra took a stroll around the streets of Florence with the Florentine's director, Marco Badiani, and they put together these videos that we'll be showing in today's talk. So essentially, Alexandra is here live in the studio, and she will be on hand to answer any of your questions that might spring to mind as we take this virtual visit of Dante's Florentine neighbourhood. So feel free to fill the comments section with your thoughts and queries. Our expert is here on hand. And so, Alexandra, we're going to start this journey not so much into hell, but rather into Dante's Florentine neighbourhood. And so what I will do is I will bring up our first video, and perhaps you could start us off.
Absolutely, definitely. So we start off, we're here in the piazza, the little piazzetta in front of Casa di Dante, and I absolutely love this little relief that showed up at a certain point in the ground, proving, of course, that Dante actually lived here. No, I'm teasing. The Museo Casa di Dante is what they call the best of the Italian fakes, meaning that they understand that it probably wasn't Dante's house. But we know that he was from this neighborhood. So we're right off of Borgo Albizzi, for those of you who are familiar, in between Borgo Albizzi and Via del Proconsolo. And we know that this is his neighborhood because of a couple of mentions that he makes. He talks about the Church of San Martino, which no longer exists, but it's just around this corner, just beyond the big giant tower that you see there, the Torre della Castagna. And then also we know that the documents talk about the Alighieri family. So Dante's born in this neighborhood in 1265. The Alighieri family, you guys can see on this relief here, Santa Margherita, the convent of Santa Margherita. We know that there was a dispute. There was a land sort of issue with a tree in the convent garden. The roots of that tree were going into the garden of the Alighieri. And so thankfully, we have this wonderful document that shows us that he comes from this neighborhood. This is a great relief because it's called Luoghi Familiari di Dante. You'll recognize a lot of these. I know there's so many Florence and Dante lovers out there watching. The Bargello, the Abbey, the Florentine Abbey we'll talk about in a second. There's Santa Margherita, Casa di Dante, Torre dei Donati, which we'll see in just a second in another video, the Baptistery of San Giovanni. So it's this wonderful plaque right there right near the Casa Museo that mentions all of these places so that you too can kind of go around the city and understand in that neighborhood some places that, as it says, would have been familiar to him during his time in the city before he gets exiled in 1302.
Of course, and I must say it's wonderful to have this opportunity to visit them virtually with you right now when we can't perhaps come to Florence and not, take this little journey around ourselves. So thank you for that, Alexandra. It's delightful.
My pleasure.
All the info when we may have walked past these plaques and not fully understood what we were looking at either. And to briefly touch on something else, I'm just curious about why you think we're speaking about Dante for 700 years. I mean, of course, that was also his objective, wasn't it? He did want to be read and see himself as this figure that would last throughout the centuries. But what is it that you think makes his work do that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And in fact, I keep kind of harping on this idea that Dante is still relevant after 700 years. To answer your question, I do think that he knew, in a certain sense, I mean, we get this sense with a lot of these great figures that he understood, the sort of the longevity of his work and of the impact that his work would have. I'm not sure that he was ever thinking 700 years. Who really is ever, quite frankly. But the story is, it's an epic, the Divine Comedy, which of course he's best known for, and what most people sort of read and think about and relate to him. He writes an epic. It's an epic, and epics are grand narratives about going home.
Yes.
we have Ulysses, we have Odysseus, we have Aeneas, for example, these great journeys about going home. And so here's Dante doing the same thing, but it's a much more, in a certain sense, believable tale, what Dante tells us, because his is about going to a spiritual home. And I think who is it, no matter your beliefs, who is it on the face of the planet Earth that hasn't thought about that and thought about where is it, perhaps that we will end up, let's say one of these days when our time here is finished. And at the same time, it's a story of life. It's a story about hitting rock bottom, making that climb up the mountain of purgatory to this reward, this celestial reward, which is spirit and love, when he sees God. And you can kind of insert whatever being, creator, source, whatever. Obviously, he's writing in a period of time that is very much rooted in the Christian tradition and Christian theology. But it's a story, my gosh. I mean, it's kind of 2020, I don't know where we are right now. Are we at purgatory yet? I don't know.
Yeah, I would reckon there's certainly merit in reading it at the moment right now to see that there can be, with 100 canti, or rather however long this lockdown has felt, 100 canti seems about right. And to get there then at the end of all that long haul.
Yeah, it takes work, but it's worth it,
I can't profess to have finished it quite yet. I have started, and it's been my task to get it finished before the celebrations for his 700th anniversary in 2020.
Right.
Speaking of which, I'll actually pop the events that are lined up for that in the comments.
Oh, great!
Because there's certainly plenty to look forward to, of course, mark the occasion, which is significant.
It is.
I suppose we should jump back into our virtual visit, which
sure.
Have clicked in. So I'll bring us into our second video.
Okay.
Then.
So here's a plaque, a Dante plaque, that talks about, it cites a verse from Paradiso. This is Paradiso 15. And it talks about how the bells of the Badia Fiorentina, the Florentine Abbey, used to ring out and mark the passage of Dante's day. Here's this almost hidden sort of church, nicknamed the Chiesa di Dante, Dante's church, but it's actually called Santa Margherita. Very, very small 11th century church, one room, hardly ever open. But it is, for centuries, it was thought to actually be the burial place of Beatrice, Dante's great love. And inside of this church, some of you might know this, inside of this church is a giant basket of letters. And in fact, I'm sort of looking up here, I think there's some tucked into the sign since it's actually closed right now. Can you guys see? There's little messages here. They're letters to Beatrice, and these are people who are asking for a favor from Beatrice in matters of the heart. Okay, I'm taking you to another place just off of Borgo Albizzi here. We've walked through this little archway, and we're coming back into this wonderfully little secret courtyard that I think so nicely illustrates how people in the time of Dante were actually living. In particular, women. You didn't go out much. You weren't outside a whole lot. You weren't taking strolls. You weren't going out for your gelato. Look at what we have here, this kind of enclosed courtyard. This would have been all tower houses. You can actually see the back of Casa di Dante here, the medieval tower. over in the corner. And so it's this great space that really allows us to understand how insulated they were, how much time they spent at home, and how they all lived within these kind of, they're called consorterie, these clans. So these are families that would come together, they would marry, they would raise their kids together, they would work together, all of this. And so this absolutely shows us what Dante's everyday might have been like. So we're coming back out. You can see here too, this is so wonderful. All of these little details that if you just kind of look up, you can see here maybe where, see there's the iron up here. This might have been where the lock would have gone into place to close off this area to make sure that everybody was staying safe.
Sì? Ah, perché ti ho già mandato.
I've brought you to the Madonna della Rosa, the Madonna of the Rose. She is the symbol of the guild that Dante belonged to, the guild of the doctors and apothecaries. Dante was neither doctor nor apothecary, but in this time period, in the 13th and 14th century, you had to be a guild member if you wanted to have any sort of participation, any sort of say in the life of Florence. So he became a guild member, and in fact, this is a very big moment in Dante's life when he joins the guild, because it will allow him to participate in politics. And this is the whole reason that Dante is exiled, because of a political fight. If you guys follow me, we're just walking around the side of Or San Michele, the guild church. And I just want to point out the Arte della Lana, so the wool guild. We only have a couple of guild buildings that are still in existence today from the medieval period, and this is one of them. So we'll pass underneath this wonderful overpass added on in the 16th century by Cosimo I de' Medici. And we'll come around to this incredible building here, the Arte della Lana, the wool guild. You can see it's characterized by the reliefs of the lambs that run all the way up along the building. So one of the most important guilds, absolutely, the wool merchants. This for Dante is even more important because now it is home. The wool guild, it was saved from the 19th century demolition by the Società Italiana Dantesca, and so this is home now to the library. They can get their hands on every single word ever written on Dante and all of his works. And in fact, you can see, if you sort of come out this way and you look up, you see a relief here of the 15th century painting, which lives in the Duomo here, Dante in front of his three worlds, Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso up above him.
It is remarkable. I was just reflecting on the visual impact he has left on the streets of the city is just honestly astounding when you think how many things are, related to or have significance to him. Yeah. Almost overwhelming, really, when you think how much we walk past on a daily basis as well, and how much presence he still has.
That's so true. That's so true. It's funny because Florence, of course, has the reputation of being a Renaissance city. And the number one thing that I'm always telling my clients and my students is that it's a medieval city. The urban layout of Florence, it still maintains, and especially right there in Dante's neighborhood, these streets, these alleyways, even the wool guild. And I mentioned that 19th century destruction, that, certain pockets of the city were completely wiped out. Thank God. Not only Or San Michele, of course, I would like to have seen them try to destroy that, but the wool guild, it was up for demolition, and the city was going to demolish it. And the Società Dantesca actually stepped up and said, no, we've actually been using it for these lectura Dantes, these reading, these groups, kind of focused on Dante studies. And so thank goodness, and I will tell you too, it's a place that still to this day, I mean, I did some work there when I was in grad school, but they to this day, pre-COVID, obviously, they hold every winter, they hold a series, they're called Lectura Dante. So they're these kind of close readings of one particular canto given by a Dantista, an expert. And so Dante, you're exactly right, Jane. I mean, he is still kind of living and breathing and right there along with us. And it does take, a little bit of searching and looking up and understanding what you're looking at, but he really is everywhere.
It's true. And I think more so in these few weeks with the Florence Light Festival. I don't know if have you been to see the Dante?
Oh, yeah.
And what did you think? I'm interested, and maybe we could just say what it is in case people haven't gotten to see it yet. The Light Festival, who's every year they take a theme, and this year it is, of course, Dante, given the 700th anniversary celebration. But across Ponte Vecchio, his words are scattered on occasion. Stars, of course, are also present, so much associated with Dante. And then we hear the words, and I think it is quite moving to walk down there near the Ponte Vecchio and hear these words. And of course, for Italians, they have a huge amount of significance, but for anyone, they have such an enormous impact. So what did you think, or what do you think of it?
I loved it. I absolutely love it. I went down the night that it opened, and I was so excited. I mean, inordinately sort of excited about the fact that it was Dante. Last year was Leonardo, and that was great. I mean, I love him. Went to Paris again, those pre-COVID traveling times. Made it to Paris, to the Louvre to see his show. But for me, Dante, it's another level. And I was so pleased because the city and the entities that made that happen this year, they titled it, the Selva Oscura, out of the dark wood into the light. And I think, wow. I mean, I just feel like we needed that so much. And I think it's just spectacular. It's long. I actually, was sort of standing there going, oh my goodness, we're still in Inferno. And it had been going about 10 minutes. This beautiful voiceover that's reading. They're not corresponding necessarily, but the graphics, the text that's there. And my whole thing with Dante is always, and I mean, I'll be honest, it's kind of my thing with history in general, actually, in any kind of poetry or literature, whatever gets you to maybe go home that night and do a Google search or dust off a book that you've had sitting around. You thought, I keep meaning to get to that. Anything that's going to get you to get a little bit closer to his work, his poetry, to turn something, spark a little bit of curiosity about him. I'm just so thrilled, and it is moving. You're exactly right. I mean, there were moments where I was getting a little to a couple of the pieces because they're very intense moments of the Divine Comedy that are blasted across this medieval bridge, one of the most, if not the most famous bridge in the world. So
of course, they really have done a fantastic job, and I think we do need this in a sense. The powerful message of it was very impactful, certainly. And now what I will do is bring up our third and unfortunately final video. I mean, they're so enjoyable, but of course we will get into how we can hear more. But I'll go into this third video, which of course is a site that absolutely everyone should recognize.
I think so.
Now I want to take you to a really special place. Let's go. You probably recognize it, even if it's been a while since I've been to Florence. We're not here for the Duomo or the cupola or the bell tower, but for the Baptistery. The Baptistery where Dante was baptized in the year 1266 in a mass baptism. That's how they did it back in those days. For Dante, this is the symbol of the city of Florence. It's where he becomes a Christian, but it's more importantly where he becomes a Florentine. It's one of the oldest buildings in the city, consecrated in 1095. It's Romanesque. We don't know the architect, but we love him, whoever he was. Look at all the geometry, this wonderful sort of play of colors. You have the white marble from Carrara, the green serpentine from Prato near here, so these local materials. And again, for Dante, this becomes truly the symbol for him of the city of Florence. I want to take you to show you another plaque. These plaques were put up in the city, by the way, at the beginning of the 20th century when Dante was starting to become a symbol of the Italian language. Dante writes the Divine Comedy in the vernacular, so the spoken language. This is an epic poem. Epic poems are about journeys they're about going home. And they were always written in ancient Greek or Latin, which were the highest forms of language. Dante instead writes it in Florentine. So he takes on this sort of label as the father of the Italian language because of this. But I bring you here to this beautiful plaque that talks about his hopes. He's actually being quizzed, Dante, in Paradiso. He's being quizzed by St. James and St. Peter on the theological virtues, so faith, hope, and love. And he's asked essentially to illustrate the three theological virtues. And when it comes to hope, he cites the Baptistery, saying, "My hope is that my poem," the comedy, the Divine Comedy, will be so well received that the Florentines, those evil wolves who kicked me out of the city when I was just a small lamb, that they will let me back in. And not only will they let me back in, but they will crown me with the laurel crown of poetry in my beautiful San Giovanni.
Alexandra, and also to finish on a note of hope was so nice and uplifting.
Exactly.
A blue sky by the Duomo. I think
that was the
certainly
first sunny day in a really long time.
Great to have gotten out then, and to finish off a Monday evening on that message has just been a lovely start to the week.
Yeah,
so good video. Of course, while we still have you, we're going to benefit from your expertise a little bit more, I hope. If people would like to ask any questions, you can feel free to comments, and we get to as many as we can. Can I just start with one of my own then?
Sure, please.
What brought you to love Dante? And I believe your background is in literature, isn't that right?
It is, yes. So my graduate work is all in Italian literature. And I was fortunate enough in graduate school to study Dante with my professor at my university, who actually herself is a Florentine. But I also studied, very thankfully and gratefully, with Stephen Botterill, he's no longer with us, but a wonderful dentista at UC Berkeley. So my university sort of paired up, and he was really a huge part, along with Elisabetta Propetti Nelson, who was at my university, in creating this love for Dante, for his poetry in particular. I will say that by the time that I went to grad school, I had already lived in Florence for about 4 years. And so it seemed also, I think, maybe natural that it had seeped in a little bit. And I really connected him so much to the city of Florence. And while I was back in the States in graduate school, I always say, my heart was always still in Florence, and Dante, I think, provided a bit of that connection. So I ended up actually writing pretty extensively on him for a variety of reasons, but I didn't write on Inferno. I actually wrote on Purgatorio because I have a kind of slight obsession with Purgatorio. As someone who was raised Catholic, it just scared the absolute, whatever's out of me that I was going to be spending all this time. And so when I found out that Dante, had written about it so beautifully, I thought maybe I'll check out where I might be for several hundred years. No, I'm just kidding.
No, but liminal states absolutely are horrifying, but also endlessly intriguing. So I can understand you there on that. There are questions coming in, and
yeah, great.
unsurprisingly, plenty of them are about how they can learn more from you. So they're wondering about your virtual classes. So I think that's a good.
Oh my God, I love you.
A good time for people to know that there is that opportunity. So
fabulous. Sheila, my Dante event. I know, sweet Sheila, thank you. Yes, to Michelle, I think it was, who asked if I hold courses. I'm so thrilled to be able to say yes, I do. I spend most of my kind of pandemic life was lecturing and teaching the visual arts and cultural studies and not really literature. And so I'm thrilled to say that starting in January, I have a 6-week course. It is really, I'm calling it a guided reading. So what my goal is to get people reading. So Jane, you're going to finish it.
Oh, yes.
Whoever else wants to start it and finish it, yes, you've got it. So you're ready. You're ready. This is your year. This is the time. And so we're going to take 6 weeks, and I'm going to guide you. I'm going to help you along in your reading by having every week, we will have about an hour and a half of sort of lecture and conversation about what everyone has read. And you can finish the first 6 weeks of 2021 saying that you have read the Divine Comedy, which I think quite a better way to get the new year started. So if you see my website, you can click on the course. It's called Divine Dante. And it'll take you right to actually an Eventbrite page. I'm using them to kind of organize it in terms of a platform. So yay, join us, please.
It's worth signing up. And I think, as you say, this is the right moment. If ever there was a moment to read and finish it, it's now, absolutely now. And in time, of course, to enjoy all the celebrations that are coming up. You know, there's certainly. In fact, that's just the course is the first of many, many Dante events on my end. So get prepared. It's going to be a very fun year. Absolutely. A few more interesting questions are coming in. One is from Julia Holloway, who we had here on Church Together also. So she's saying, Alexandra, can we connect? She said, I'm Berkeley too, work with Dante's teacher and also Dante's Florence. So you've come up with the right audience here. So
Great. Yes, Julia, absolutely. Thank you. Yes, I know your work. Thank you.
Another good question, which one I actually spent a lot of time studying when I was trying to choose a copy, is which English translation of Dante do you recommend? And of course, that's so important. The right translation is fundamental to your enjoyment and understanding. So have you a preference?
I could not agree with you more, Jane. I think actually translations, I think, are terribly personal. And so I do have a favorite. My favorite is by Derling and Martinez. So I don't want to misspeak. I know that one was at University of Santa Cruz, and I think the other at Chicago. I'm not sure. At any rate, I quite love it because it's a facing text, first of all. So it's Italian on one side and English on the other, which I just recommend in general, even if you have really little or no Italian. It very much is lovely just to kind of let it seep in. It's a non-rhyming translation, which I just personally prefer a non-rhyming translation. Dante wrote the Divine Comedy in rhyming tercets. It was a poetic form that he invented. So in the original, of course, it does rhyme. I personally, they're not my favorite. They feel a little bit forced. However, I think that the best way to understand which translation fits for you is to use Amazon, not to purchase the book, but since we can't go into bookstores and peruse the beautiful shelves full of the translations, go on and see if you can do the see inside this book and read a couple. I'm happy to tell you, mine is Derling Martinez. If you want a rhyming translation, I quite like Chardi just for his, the sort of compactness of it and so on. But I think you're not going to read something that doesn't resonate with you. And if the language, we've all read bad, believe me, I've done some bad translations, so, no shade on anybody, but we've we've all read translations where you're just going, this doesn't work for me at all. And it takes you away from the text. And so I think it's a very personal thing. Check it out on Amazon and then email, if you can't go in person, to your local bookstore, or run down to your local bookstore and have them order it. We got to keep them in business. But check them out, look through them, read through them, see which one kind of fits the best. You can take the same canto, for example, you know, the first or the fifth of Inferno or something, and see which one resonates with you.
No, absolutely right. And as you said, the only way to figure out if it's going to be a style you're going to enjoy reading for that many pages is to have a little check and sneak in, as it were. Another question, which is another interesting one from our very own Helen, which is, what's your take on the plans to open the Italian Language Museum in Santa Maria Complex in the near future? And what would you like to see included in the new space when it opens? We're hoping 2022.
I know. First of all, thank you, Helen. This is when I saw this news, it was like, the heavens opened, and finally. I am a little like, I'll believe it when I see it. I hate to say that, but it was supposed to open in March, and now they're saying that work will start by 2021. So it's all, the money's there, I guess. But what would I like to see included? I mean, the list is so long. I think it's going to be really, you ask a very interesting question. What would I like to see include, things that are precious to a lot of other collections. So obviously, we don't have anything in Dante's hand, unfortunately, nothing, zero. We do have, or the Vatican has, Petrarch's Canzoniere. I wouldn't mind that. Or think from La Crusca, I mean, letting us into La Crusca and being able to see some of, this is the Italian Language Academy that's out at a Medici Villa in Sesto Fiorentino. How wonderful that would be. I mean, that's just an absolute treasure trove. Anything, obviously, from the medieval period, I would absolutely love and adore. But also, the Cinquecento, where we start to really have these debates over what form the Italian language should take. But also go, and then the foundation of things like La Crusca and the academies, the language academies, on into, of course, the, I wouldn't mind even a first edition Promessi Sposi. That would be fine with me, 19th century. But what I was going to say was that, we also risk maybe impoverishing other collections if, there's a fine line sort of between what can be, and of course I'm teasing about Petrarch, the Vatican will never let that go. But my hope is that they can strike some sort of balance of having things that will come from other institutions that will be meaty, not just a bunch of facsimiles, because I think that would actually be quite depressing. Or if you're going to do it that way, make it just like a visual, beautiful modern display where you're showing, the handwriting from the manuscripts, and you're really bringing people in. Because I'll be honest, I think, my eyes lit up, mine, and maybe, like a dozen other people. But I can't imagine like trying to sell the Museum of the Italian Language to a traveler. They're like, I'm good. I think I'll stick with Botticelli. I think they're going to have to do something. I don't mean to say dumb it down, and I don't mean to say make it some crazy, spectacle. But there is a way that they could do it if they're not going to be able to have a lot of really powerful original pieces. Yes. To do it to be something that's really visually impactful, and would be able to speak to especially young people, obviously, but really communicate, which it's a language museum. Hopefully they'll be able to do that. But I'm thrilled, Helen, to answer your question. I cannot wait, and I wish they would call me.
Well, exactly. And I mean, I was just reflecting that it is such a difficult thing to do, to make a museum of literature, have people queue outside the door. How do you do that? I mean, people see literature as such a personal, you sit at home, you read a book. why do I need to go to a museum to celebrate the book or have the book? So it's a hard thing to make right.
I think it's a hard thing to make right, but I also think it's something that, because people do recognize, especially Dante, as, you know, this sort of father of the Italian, and they always say, why? You know, why is that? And it's actually not an easy answer. It's not, oh, he wrote the Divine Comedy in the vernacular and boom, we had the Italian language. Absolutely, there's centuries in there between the writing of 500, actually 5 centuries before the Italian language is actually, you know, invented in the 1860s, and so 1850s, 1860s, and so there is a story there. There is a story there. How you can tell it, that depends. That's going to take some massive creativity. I can't wait. Yeah,
but we'll be positive for it in any case. It'll certainly be
definitely. Oh my gosh, yeah, I can't wait.
One question which has related to our translation question is your thoughts on Wordsworth Longfellow for the Divine Comedy, if you've any experience with that translation.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, one of the most popular, one of the most long-lasting. Again, I think that it's such a personal thing. It's like me saying the 5 best pieces of art in Florence. I mean, that is so subjective. And so, you know, for me to be able to say, oh, that particular translation or this particular translation, you know, there's reasons that it's going to resonate with you. Some like the you know, the more sort of dated language, like a Longfellow could be, and others who prefer something that's a little more modern. And others who would say, no, oh my gosh, you know, they're using words that, you know, that you would hear now. No, that doesn't sit right with me because it's a 700-year-old poem. I think it's so subjective. And if you just take 30 minutes and kind of go through, you know, five or six of them, and just, like I said, pick one portion of one canto, the same one, so that you can judge them off one another. For me, I think it will, you know, you take 30 minutes, but it's going to impact your entire reading of it. So.
No, I agree. I landed on Robin Kirkpatrick. That's where I came to based on my kind of explored. But you're right, it's the only way to figure out which style is going to
absolutely
sit.
And they're endless. I mean, they're really endless. You know, if you think about, because they're styles, right? And I do think that, especially, I have nothing but respect for any kind of translator, but especially of poetry. Something that's kind of cool, you know, one of my goals in this next year is to actually learn as much as I can the Neapolitan language.
Interesting.
And so I've been reaching out to a couple of contacts of mine down in Naples, and one of them said, oh, here, and I can't remember his name, I don't have it right at my fingertips, but she said he translated the comedy into Neapolitan. I knew that there was a Neapolitan version of it. So, you know,
yeah,
you can go nuts.
That's the exciting thing too, is like not playing with his language, but that his language is flexible enough to fit into these different dialects, languages, etc. is another remarkable thing. So I think the more you can read, the better. It really is.
Better. You use such a beautiful word, flexible, and that's really what he was showing, actually, by using the vernacular, was saying, look how flexible it is. I can take you down into the very deepest pits of hell, and I can take you to see the face of God. You know, the light of God and love that moves the whole universe. And I can do that all in the same language. Talk about flexibility.
Absolutely. And that's a quite good point to finish on, I think, unless there we've any last minute questions that are going to creep in here. But what I can say is just thank you so much, Alexandra. You know, it's been an absolute to follow you around the streets of Florence and to hear you're really casting light on things we walk past and don't fully appreciate. So it's great to get that little bit of insight, and with the hopes of delving into that even further in your course, of course. And I'll pop that link up again in case people would like to sign up for that Stand Up 2021 in a literary way. And I'll just remind our viewers as well that we have all our TF Togethers in this article at the bottom of the screen. So you'll be able to catch the replay of this on our YouTube channel and see any of our previous and upcoming talks. So of course, the best way to do that is to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and then you're not going to miss out on any of them. And I'll just let you know, Alexandra, we've got lots of thank yous coming in here. You know, really, people have really enjoyed.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming. And the Florentine, Jane, thank you, honestly. This was great.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. And we'll be looking forward to learning and hearing more from you in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jane.
Bye. Ciao.
Bye, everybody.